Good morning, partners in crime. It is great to see you today. I am so excited. We have Elena Taylor with us today. Elena has spent several years working in the theater as a playwright, a director, a designer, and an educator before she started sharing her talents with us in storytelling and fiction. In addition to writing the Eddie Shoes mystery, which we are currently touring, she also writes the Sheriff Bet Rivers mysteries under the name of Elena Taylor. Welcome. It's great to
Thank
have you with
you.
us.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
So, Elena, you are in Spokane, Washington.
Spokane, and that's my view right there.
That
That's
is amazing.
it's pretty great. I'm on 12 acres just south of town. Yeah.
Wow. I look at your pictures on Facebook and I am always in awe of what you get to look at on a daily basis.
I have to admit it's pretty great. Like and all the seasons. I love all of it. We get snow. I used to live on the west side where we used to joke we had summer and mud season. Like those were the two. We had summer. And like I love that I get actually four seasons. We have snow in the wintertime, we have beautiful fall color. Spring is, flowers and plants and beautiful things. My doggos are going to bark in the background. And summer's we have a little bit of a scary fire season in the summer, but
Mhm.
other than that, I just love it here. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. So, right now we're touring the Eddie Shoes Mystery Series. And I have to admit, I love Eddie. She
Yay.
just completely makes me laugh. So tell us a little bit about Eddie so that viewers know more if they haven't gotten to meet her yet.
I love it when people say they love Eddie because she's so near and dear to my heart. She's so Eddie is. I hope you don't hear my doggos. Someone just pulled up and okay. Um, so Eddie was a high school dropout, runs, kind of leaves home really early, isn't quite sure what to do. And she falls in with a private eye as his girl Friday, as his assistant, and realizes that's what she wants to do with her life. And so she becomes a private eye. And what I love about Eddie, she's younger than me, right? Even, she's a little younger than I am. And so it's fun to kind of go back and revisit with her what it is when you're trying to figure out who you are.
Mhm.
Not that I know, at 55 who I am, but it's definitely different,
Yes. And
right, at her age. And so she's kind of snarky, she's independent, she's practical, but she's also someone who, if it's super hard, she bolts.
yeah.
And she's trying to get over that as well and sort of be like, okay, I can't really keep bolting. Like I'm not 15. So yeah, so I just sort of love her, and she came to me really easily, like her voice and who she is.
Yeah, she's a really great person. And her relationship with her mother is so contentious, but it's so real. I mean, it's just like I've had those conversations in my kitchen.
Yeah, yeah. And Chava, her mom, people often ask me, they're like, oh, is your mom like Chava? And you're like, I'm like, no, like my mom is nothing like her. What the truth of it is that the mom is my younger self and Eddie is my maturing self, and that the contentiousness, the one thing that Eddie and her mom share with me and my mom is my mom's been my best friend for years. I love my mom. We vacation together. We love being together, whether we're hanging out at a coffee shop or flying off somewhere. Like my mom and I have a wonderful relationship. She's like my best friend. And all the contentiousness aside, Eddie and her mom really deeply love each other. And that's the only thing that carries over. The contentiousness is what wars inside me. It's this internal battle I have between sort of the wild child that I was and sort of the practical person that I adult with the bolting is definitely sort of has been in my makeup. I'm like, done with that, right? I don't want to, done with that. And so It's all this own, and that's part of why I love Eddie so much, is that I get to sort of explore my own issues.
Came to learn a lot about you today, Elena.
Yeah, but also fictionalized. I'm just gonna put that out there, right? A lot of this is fictionalized, but yes, that's there.
So now the mysteries in each of these books, they're dangerous, and they're really deep mysteries. Can you tell us a little bit about how you managed to combine that with keeping them fun and clean? I mean, because they're definitely both.
Right. Yeah. And it's such an interesting subgenre. And I'll answer your question, but I'm gonna tell you a little story first, which was Sue Grafton, who was one of my very early influences, right? A's for Alibi, B's for Burglar. And I loved Sue Grafton. And she is the first author who really straddled that line.
Yeah.
Her Kinsey Millhone, and my joke is that if James Rockford and Kinsey Millhone had a love child, it would be Eddie Shoes. Like, because she really is born out of the Rockford Files, which I watched as a kid, and Sue Grafton's, alphabet series. And one of the things that I loved about Sue Grafton is she would say, "I do not write cozies. I write private eye."
Mhm.
And it has the cozy crossover in the readership
Yeah.
because there's not graphic violence, there's not graphic sex. And that's true. But the heart of it is a private eye, not an amateur, right? Eddie's a professional, and this is what she does for a living. And that's very different than, and I love cozies, this isn't a knock, but it's very different than, the bookstore owner who stumbles over a dead body in the alley and figures it out through recipes. Like, that's a different animal. She is a professional. And so what makes it so great when you write a private eye kind of series, that sort of Janet Ivanovich sort of style, is that you get to have the professionalism where she
Right.
understands how to do, she doesn't have to learn how to be an investigator. She is an investigator, right?
Mhm.
But you get to cross that over with light, fun, funny, and not go into a graphic violence, graphic sex. It's the psychological stuff which is deep, right? All of the books have a social message
Yes.
happening underneath them, right? Which is
Mhm.
serious. And the dynamic between her and her mom, it is serious, right? And
Right.
and her
Yeah.
relationships. But I don't have to, it's fun. They're beach reads.
I mean, there's a lot of sarcasm and a lot of snarkiness, and it's light.
Yeah.
But they're deep mysteries. They're
And
they're really
people
good, and you
die.
have to think through them.
Yes. I know. I love it. It's like what's more fun than, a little bit of murder.
I mean, sure, why not?
Right?
Now, the setting for these mysteries is close to where you are,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah. Mhm.
Why is that important, and what parts of that did you play off of to keep that real to you?
Yeah, so this was sort of fun for me. So at the time that I wrote the first Eddie Shoes, I lived on what we call the West Side, which is west of the
Right.
Cascades, which is that tiny little sliver on the edge of Washington State, right? So I lived on the West Side. And when I was writing her, I thought, well, I don't want to put her in Seattle. Seattle's sort of big and iconic, and it's like there's already stuff there. I didn't want to do Seattle. I wanted something a little bit smaller. And I didn't want to put her in Olympia because Olympia is the state capital, and that was going to have political, things. I don't write political stuff. And so I was like, well, that doesn't quite work, but I wanted her kind of in a town. So I was like, oh, Bellingham. So Bellingham is a college town almost to the Canadian border. It's very far north.
Oh,
And
okay.
what's so great about it is I'm like, you can run for the border, you can hop on a boat, you can get on a train. Like, people can escape in so many different ways. And I was
Mhm.
like, that's a great place to have murders. But here's the complication. They might have a murder a year, right? So the first book is set where Eddie lives in Bellingham. In the second book, it starts there, but it crosses the state and into, I'm not giving any plot things away.
Yeah.
So it crosses the state and she has to leave town. Then in the third book, she's on vacation with her mom in Leavenworth. And part of that was because I couldn't kill three people in the span of 9 months in Bellingham. It's just
Oh,
too much
come on,
murder.
just be Jessica Fletcher.
It's exactly where I'm at. I'm like, this isn't going to be Cabot Cove. So how do I deal with this? And I was like, oh, we're gonna send her on vacation. And So it was that fun thing of sort of thinking about how can I use, and I love the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
I love the cities, I love the rural areas. And depending on who you talk to, the Pacific Northwest can go all the way into Montana, all the way down to the California border. And some people even include Northern California. I mean, it just sort of
Mhm.
depends because it's a region, it's not boundaries. And I love the Pacific Northwest and showing people it is more than Seattle and Portland,
Yeah.
right? It is more than Seattle and Portland. So that's why the area is so important to me, but also why it's sort of a great place to kill people. You know, we you can hide bodies out in those woods behind me, right? I mean, I shouldn't say that, but you can.
Well, I mean, and people aren't going to look. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's fun to do something just a little bit different, you know.
yeah, and I've noticed, so I'm an East Coast girl, but I find myself reading books that are set in the Pacific Northwest very frequently. So obviously that's a part of the country that pulls me.
Yeah. Well, you should come out and visit. It's pretty great.
Yeah, I can't get over your view. Um, so I don't think this is a spoiler, but you also pull in like gambling and stuff
Mhm.
into the books. And that's not something that's prevalent everywhere. But
Yeah.
is that something that you guys have up there?
Well, we have a lot of casinos because
Mhm.
there's a lot of Native American, you know, the reservations often
Okay.
have casinos because that's a lot of ways that income, you know, for income. So there actually are quite a few casinos. The one of the criticism I got on the first book is they're like, there's no mob in Bellingham. I'm like, okay, I have a private eye named Eddie Shoes. You can't take this seriously, right? Like there's a lot of tongue in cheek in here. Don't read it for like the
Right.
factual, you know. So I sort of love that. And the critique was like, I love the book, it's so great, but you know, there's this one little piece. And I was so amused by that. So we do, you know, there are casinos and things like that, a lot of them around. In terms of like other things that are in there, you know, where whether it's talking about drug addiction or those other things, you
Mhm.
know, we're like anywhere else in the country. Some small towns have big problems,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things that's fun about Bellingham is, so here's a funny story. I actually there is a real casino um that I kind of based the one that you know visit book one, but
Yeah.
so here's something funny. I wanted to learn a little bit about casino security. And I went over to a casino that was near where I was living at the time when I was living in North Bend. And I went in, and people are always happy to talk to you. Oh, you're a writer. Yeah, let me, you know. So I show up and I come out, and there's like a security guard there. And I said, I'm a novelist. And I had my like books with me to prove to them I was real, you know. And I just have a couple questions about, you know, security. Can I talk to, you know, somebody
Yeah.
in charge? And he goes, yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Hang on, let me go talk to my boss. And he comes back a few minutes later and he goes, yeah, he won't talk to you. I'm like, what do you mean? Everybody talks to me. And he goes, yeah, he has to assume you're casing the joint. So I was like, okay, one, that's really interesting right there. And two, I can make up anything. And unless they work in the industry, people won't know that it's fake.
Right.
It's the only time I've
Uh,
ever been turned down to talk to an expert.
that's so hilarious.
Yeah.
Now, getting into that, actually, your books are rewrites. So they're re-released.
Yeah.
So you did some updating. So what
Yeah.
kind of updating did you need to do to make
Yeah.
them look current?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled with the relaunch. So what had happened was I was out with a very small press
Mhm.
and some things happened that weren't great and I got my rights back.
Oh,
So
that's
I
great.
now so the way it works, we talk about getting our rights back. I never lose you never lose your rights. As an author, the rights are always yours. What you give away or what you sell, what you how you earn money is you allow a publisher to put them out and be the sole company putting them out, right? So when I say I got my rights back, I got back that they no longer have permission to put them out, okay? But what it meant was I didn't have anybody to put the books out. So there was a couple of years there where they weren't available unless you could buy them used, right? Everything got pulled. An
Yeah.
audio, that were on audio. That's on a different contract. So my agent and I just kind of waited and we're looking for a publisher because it's hard to get books put back out with a new publisher. That's not an easy thing to do.
Right. Yes.
And so my agent and I, we found this great publisher who picks up like backlist books or books like mine that have been out and the rights have returned. Wonderful publisher. And they loved them and said, we want to put out all 3 books. And so brand new covers. I love the covers. They're
Yeah,
so
they fit Eddie.
They fit Eddie. And they have a kind of Janet Ivanovich feel, which is fun too.
They
Like,
do.
it has resonance with that. So the rewriting part was they're slightly different for each book. The first one is I just simply am a better writer than I was. I'm multi-books.
We grow.
We grow,
Yeah.
Let's be honest. If your first book is your best, you're in trouble, right? So the first book, I just really improved the writing itself, the actual craft of it. The second book was really pretty tight. The first time out, it was sort of the book that I felt was the most solid. So again, kind of minor stuff. The third book is where the much bigger changes happened. There was a subplot that my original publisher didn't like, and they had me cut it, and I was not happy, and it never quite fit with that subplot missing. The book felt a little bit awkward. So I got to put that subplot back in.
Yeah.
And it's lots of people who've read both are like, yeah, we felt that missing. Like even not knowing it, something didn't quite fit. And so that was the big rewrite on the third one, was getting to put that subplot back in. So I'm super happy about that.
That's amazing. And you mentioned your covers. I love your covers. Actually, All We Buried, I look at that all the time. I love that cover.
It's so good. And that's actually a different publisher. I really lucked out. So All We Buried was with Crooked Lane. And, when that cover, you gets emailed to you, do you approve? And they're great about working with you and stuff, but we get that cover. And I sent a little note to my agent and I was like, do you love this as much as I do? And she's like, oh my God, this is like the best cover ever, right? I mean, because the way it typically works in traditional publishing, and it varies a little bit company to company and who you are and your contract and all that, but basically they do covers and you have approval, right? So you're not necessarily involved in the process. Like these covers, I'm in reverse here. These covers, they just showed up and I'm like, yeah, great, sign off. And with All We Buried, it was more of a, here's what we've got. Is there anything you want to tweak? And I'm like, oh my God, it's perfect. Like it was perfect out of the gate. And then Severn House, my new publisher, actually, and well, this happened with Crooked Lane too. It was like, do you have ideas? Are there images? Is there imagery, that you like? And they kind of work with you. They put it together and you still have approval or disapproval. But people often ask, do you get to help design? And I'm like, it varies. Sometimes no, but I do get to say, no. Luckily,
well, even giving them like general point ideas of how you envision your book is helpful, because then there's at least a starting point of.
Yeah, huge. Especially when your publishers are in New York and you're like wanting to capture Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So now tell us a little bit about your world outside of writing and your wonderful view and what it is you do when you're not editing and editing.
Yes. So my other day job, right? I have 2 day jobs. My other day job, I'm a developmental editor. And so I work with writers on their manuscripts. And I also do the business side. I work with a company called Allegory Editing. And I also do the business side. So query letters and synopsis and how to find agents that are appropriate and all that. So I do a lot of that. And then, as you can tell by the fencing there underneath 3 strikes, you're dead, I'm on horse property. And so I have 3 horses, 3 horses, 2 dogs, 2 cats. It keeps me pretty busy. So horses require a certain amount of care. There's people who, their horses are out in a pasture and they have a big bowl of hay and a water trough and they don't really need a lot of interaction. But I'm not that kind of horse owner. So my guys they have pasture, they have stalls, they have paddocks. So I clean every day. And yeah. And then, that doesn't even count the grooming and the training and the riding and other things. So I have a lot of time out with my horses, and the doggos. And that right there is kind of my daily
That's a
routine.
day.
That's a day, right? I get up and feed, and then I work, and then I go and do turnout and clean, and then I do work, and then I feed. I mean, it's like
Hmm.
what's so great about it. And I love my horses, but I also love that they get me up on my feet. They get me outside, regardless
Yeah.
of the weather. It doesn't matter what it's doing. You're out there. It gets you outside. It keeps you moving, and it's just so it's a break, from being at the computer. And I can see them from my window, right? I mean,
Oh, yes.
this picture's from my office window, basically. And so I can look out and see them running around, and it's just such a pleasure.
That sounds wonderful. And it makes that view even better
I know, right?
because something you love so much is just out that window.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to have a background that had radar kind of peeking over my shoulder, and people were like,
Mhm.
Elena, I can't stop looking at your horse. I was like, oh, that's probably not the best to put up.
Now, you mentioned allegory editing. Now, you have some nonfiction books that you wrote. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they're helpful?
Yeah, and I'll tell you how they came about. So, they're called the Wait, Wait, Don't Query (parentheses yet) series. And um, the way it evolved was during the pandemic, I held weekly writing workshops, and it was to
Yes.
ground me, it was to give people a place to go, and they were free. People could come for free. And I did 54 weeks in a row.
Phew,
I didn't miss a one.
mhm,
And it was such a great dynamic community,
mhm.
because it was like a place we could all go and not think about lockdown, right? Every week. Like, it became kind of a touchstone. And I had always thought about writing a book about writing, and had kind of, had different outlines and different, proposals and people were asking me in the workshops, Elena, you should be writing this stuff down. And so I kind
Yes.
of, okay, I went back to it, and I kept grappling with these huge sort of outlines. And it finally dawned on me that what was helpful about the workshops was I talked about one thing for an hour.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, I could recreate that in a guide. And so, like, the first is a foundation of plot. All I talk about is story structure. I don't get into anything else, just story structure. So it's short, it's quick, it has exercises, it's immediately applicable, but it's very focused. And then the second one is the construction of character. And so I talk about super objectives and obstacles and stakes, and how to, working with dialogue. And it's very specific. And they work in concert, right? Because, as I like to say, plot is character in action. I mean, that's all a plot is. It's characters doing things, right? So you have to
Yeah.
have character, and you have to have story structure. So they work together. But it was like a light bulb went off to not write this big, huge, sprawling book about writing with all the aspects, but to do one at a time. So I do have in my back pocket to write a third. I sort of have done kind of outlining about approaching rewrites. Yeah, right. I mean, we need that.
You do. Yeah.
So I hope I will be continuing the series. It's just sort of the question of, I have some fiction that I have to finish, make a little space for my nonfiction. But I really love being able to provide such a targeted, such a targeted book. Yeah, books.
Yeah. We've shared your book several times with aspiring authors, and they absolutely loved it. And it really firmed up in their heads where they needed to go next. And then after they got there, then they could start over and start again. And they're like, oh, wait, I missed this. Oh, I should have done this, because then they've just got a clearer path.
Yeah.
So it's been very helpful for a lot
Oh,
of people.
wonderful. I mean, I even go back sometimes to be like, oh, Elena, go back to the basics. Like, it's just that kind of
Yes.
thing that, there's a reason why world-class musicians practice scales.
Hmm.
You have to return to those basics. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. So glad you.
Fundamentals are necessary.
Yeah, yeah, yes, they are in anything, right? In
Yes,
anything you do. You know, I I
absolutely.
I I don't do a lot with my horses in the wintertime, and I'm like, okay, weather's good, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna go out and just do a little basic groundwork and see, do we remember how to communicate? Like, you don't
Yeah.
want to throw your saddle on your horse and be like, yeah, you haven't ridden in 2 months, but I'm just gonna go out, no, they're gonna be like, what? So writing is the same.
Wow.
Everything.
Now you have some big news that is happening later this year. Do you want to share?
Yeah, my beautiful other cover there, Cold World.
Yes.
I'm so excited about this. So the second in my Sheriff Bet Rivers books comes out, A Cold World. And as you can imagine, it's wintertime. And so Bet Rivers is a sheriff in a tiny little rural town, and it's actually technically Eastern Washington, even though it's on the Cascades because it's on the eastern side of the Cascades,
Okay.
which is a very different community. The west side is um, much more liberal, much more crowded.
Mhm.
And it's that we talk about the I-5 corridor.
Yeah.
And then everything east of the mountains, right, which is 7/8 of the state. I've never done the math, but something like that, is much more kind of a rural mentality. And I loved creating Bet. She's super practical, lives in this tiny little town. And, I'm debating about whether I'm going to run into the Cabot Cove problem there too. But I'm so happy to have this second book come out. It's with a different publisher. It was one of those I kind of got orphaned during the pandemic, and it's hard to get a second book in a series. And Severn House has just been fantastic. And I love that the cover, like it feels like the same world. Like it
It's
doesn't
really funny because I was thinking about that, and they're completely different, but they so go
they fit
together.
together. They absolutely fit together. They have the
Yeah.
similar lines and the mountains and
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm thrilled about that. But it comes out on August 6th. Pre-sales
Yay.
are out now. You can be the first, and it's coming out on hardback and ebook, and I'm very
Oh,
excited.
hardback too.
Yeah.
Yay.
I know it's so pretty. It'll be so pretty in hardback.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, I have all of your books digital, and I'm like, why don't I have them in print? Because I love those covers. What is wrong with me?
I know. You need all of them. You need your Elena Hartwell and Elena Taylor bookshelves.
Yes. Yeah, this is so exciting. So, can you give us a little bit of a rundown about what this book is about and why we need to grab it right away?
Yes. So basically the first book is her first Bet Rivers has come back to her tiny little town. She's going to be interim sheriff. Her father dies and she ends up sheriff. And that's her first homicide investigation on her own
Mhm.
as sheriff. It's the first book. So the second book, and you can read them, great, go out and read All We Buried Now, but you also can read them you can read the second one without having read the first. But basically, it kind of picks up a few months later, and this isn't giving anything away. This is how the book opens. She's staring down the largest winter storm her town has seen in, years, right? And so she's in this sort of panic mode. And this is for real. When I lived in North Bend, which is not even off the freeway much, and, Bettstown is up in the mountains, and we got literally snow locked for weeks
Oh
because of
my.
a freak huge storm. The National Guard had to dig North Bend out. That's how bad our snow was because we weren't a town that typically got that much snow. We'd get snow, but not
Mhm.
like this. And the National Guard had to dig us out. And I was like, oh, that's got to happen to Bet, right? Bet's got to face that. So she's up in her tiny little town, only one road in, and she's, this huge storm is coming, and she thinks, I've ticked all the boxes. We can get through this as long as we don't have any emergencies. And as the storm is coming in, this is the very first chapter. As the storm is coming in, she gets a call that a teenager has been found injured up on the mountain on a snowmobile, and she and another guy who lives there who's part of search and rescue, the two of them have to go up and bring this boy down. Now of course he's He's dead, right? That's first chapter. Nothing, I'm not giving anything away. Um, so she's now facing the storm, and what happened to this kid? Was it an accident? You know, I need to deal with this. And so it moves forward with you know, all the fun dynamics between characters. You know, her deputy has a pregnant wife, and so his tension is split, and you know, she's in the middle of, you know, trying to look into this kid's death, and there's a bar brawl, and so she's facing all of the things that would have happened anyways, dealing with a storm like this. She's sort of it, right? She's the one that everybody's going to turn to. You know, they don't have a hospital. They don't have, you know, if they can't get a helicopter in, if there's an emergency, she's truly on her own in this sort of island. And it progresses from there. And, you know, it's one of those things where I love thinking about the perfect storm for people,
Yeah.
where the intersection of the personal, the criminal, and the elements kind of come together. And, you know, you kind of find sprinklings of that through the, you know,
And there's so much you can't do about 2/3 of those.
and you can
Just
do about snow coming down. Yeah. You're caught in a fire, nothing you can do about, I mean, it's like those things are out of our control. So the only thing, you know, what can you control? And that's what I like to throw at my characters.
wow. It sounds so exciting. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy
I'm really
very soon.
yeah, I'm really excited about this book coming out. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Elena. It's always great to chat with you.
Good to see you
So
too.
I hope to have you back again soon.
August. We'll come back in August.
We will have you back in August. I am very excited. So thank you so much. And we will talk to you later. Partners in Crime people, check out the show notes, and it has all the links so you can get Elena's books. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.